Hi there. In this video, we are going to go over healthy masculinity versus toxic masculinity. My name is Christopher and my coaching business is Humble Fox Consultations. And with that, let's dive right into it. I wanted to start off this presentation with a quotation by Robert Bly in his book Iron John. He says that grief is the doorway to a man's feelings. And I hope that that can help to kick us off to what we're talking about today. Pulled from a couple of different sources. We're going to be pulling today from John Bradshaw's Healing the Shame That Binds You and Iron John, a book about men by Robert Bly. Both of these books can be found in the description below if you're interested in checking them out. So let's dive right into it. I think it's important to just immediately start off by discussing what we mean by healthy masculinity and toxic masculinity. I made another video talking about toxic masculinity, and I really don't like using that word. I prefer the terms wounded masculinity, but for the sake of brevity and the sake of just that people sort of have a connotation they understand when it comes to toxic masculinity, we're going to be using that word. So qualities of healthy masculinity include a couple of different things. One, first and foremost, there's a sense of emotional intelligence. If we look over on the flip side with qualities of toxic masculinity, we notice that there's a suppression of emotion. There is this belief in mainstream, sort of just the masculine ethos today that men are supposed to be stoic. And this isn't stoic in the actual sense that the early Stoics actually used the word stoicism. This is stoic, and they use it as a cop-out for not feeling their emotions. That a man is supposed to be 100% rational and completely disconnected from his body. And that is actually what is at the root and causes the pain and suffering that men who are quote-unquote toxic actually perpetuate. They're out of touch with their bodies, they're out of touch with their emotions, and they're really suffering inside from having this disconnection because they're not connected to their authentic core. And when we have trauma that is stored inside of the body that removes us from our authenticity, then we reenact that trauma and hurt other people. It's the simple cliche, hurt people. And that is really the essence of masculinity. So qualities of healthy masculinity, also respect for others. This understanding that other people actually exist and that they have needs, wants, wishes, and desires as well. Over on the toxic masculinity side, we see this same need is expressed as dominance and control as opposed to listening to and hearing out individuals and embracing their individuality. We recognize that it's all about dominance and control over others in order to feel safe on the inside. Once again, relating back to that trauma theme, if I don't feel safe in my body, I need to control the external world in order to feel safe. Vulnerability. So embracing vulnerability, meaning emotional vulnerability, being able to tell others that we need help. As a man, being able to say, I need help, that I can't do this alone. A lot of us men are taught that we need to be individual and self-reliant to the nth degree and unable to express the need that we may actually need help from other people and be dependent on others. This can also be seen on the qualities of toxic masculinity as well as recognizing the qualities of misogyny and homophobia. Toxic masculinity perpetuates violence against women and LGBTQ plus communities and individuals as well. So accountability for healthy masculinity, recognizing that we may be at fault for some of the actions that happen in the world, but not to the extent that may hurt us, which some individuals may go to is saying that the entire world is my fault. Accountability in a healthy way that acknowledges we atone for our actions, but understanding where our actions meet their limits as well. Whereas with toxic masculinity, we have this idea of entitlement and privilege, that toxic masculinity fosters entitlement and prioritizes self-interest over other well-being. And then we also have this idea of the positive role models and negative role models, that with healthy masculinity, how many men in your life can you currently think of that you would look up to and call and look at them as a healthy masculine man? Chances are there's probably not a whole lot. There are a lot more negative role models that gain the attention of social media. Our current culture promotes and actually rewards individuals for embodying a toxic masculine presentation in order to gain likes, admiration, views, etc. It's almost something that is a magnet for our attention, and we actually promote it with money and views and admiration and etc., as opposed to embodying healthy masculinity, which is a lot more subtle and positive. So we're talking here that toxic masculinity is actually a form of shame. That what toxic masculinity actually is at its core is toxic shame. And you may be asking yourself, why are we talking about shame? What does that have anything to do with masculinity? And I understand there are a lot of different voices in the men's space and the masculine space right now. And I think that there are a lot of men who fail to speak about and recognize and discuss that trauma and shame are at the core of a lot of men's issues, whether it's validation seeking, whether it's pornography addiction, whether it's feeling lonely in today's world, whether it's suicidal ideation, depression. We're not talking about the root cause of all this. A lot of men are like, get gung-ho and get self-disciplined and take on, responsibility and everything will be okay. And although there may be some merit in that, if we're not addressing the root cause of the malaise, the experience inside of our bodies, then what are we doing here? We're not getting at the root. So the core issues of toxic masculinity, I really like using this image. This is what a lot of us, including myself, were conditioned to believe as young children. Men don't cry. Don't be a wimp. Be a man. Man up. I can viscerally feel this word man up in my body. It doesn't mean anything, but I can feel in my body that when somebody says that, I'm being shamed, as if a man is supposed to act in a certain way. It is stripping us from our authenticity. When we're experiencing emotion as children, as little boys, and we start crying, and somebody says something like man up or stop being such a girl, then immediately we associate this emotional expression as a feminine quality, and because we're shamed for it, we assume that anything feminine, or we make the conclusion that anything feminine is bad or isn't worth experiencing. And so we reject the inner feminine inside of ourselves, the part of us that is intuitive, connected to spirituality and creativity, the part of us that can feel emotions. And so what we do instead is we stuff all these emotions inside, and then to feel anything, many of us will find addictions through drugs or pornography or through work or through relationships. We find something that we can cling on to in order to try and promulgate a sense of feeling inside of us when we have become so disconnected from who we really are at our core. So contrary to societal beliefs, healthy masculinity, men are extremely sensitive and emotional creatures. If you look at a little boy who is expressing himself without having the taint of shame and his innocence stripped away from him yet, he is an extremely emotional, intuitive, and a sensitive creature. And you may argue through puberty and whatever that gets conditioned out of him, but I would say that is still very much inside of us and very much alive. That inside of each boy, inside of each man lives a boy inside of him, and that boy is full of creativity, spontaneity, exuberance, sexuality, and emotion. And one of the only emotions that we are able to express as men in our society is the emotion of anger. Anger and aggression, aggression being the expression, an unhealthy expression of anger, are the only emotions that we as men are allowed to experience. And a lot of us don't even have access to our anger. A lot of us are nice guys, and what ends up happening is we shove all that down, including the anger. And every once in a while we have these huge rage outbursts. That's because we're not learning how to experience our emotions in the moment, because we weren't allowed to children, because it wasn't safe for us to do so. So let's talk a little bit about shame here. So what is shame? Well, healthy shame is the part of us that knows ourselves. So shame is not an entirely bad emotion. There is an element of shame that lets us know our limitations, that allows us to recognize that we are not God or creator, or however you like to use that languaging, that we ourselves are in fact human, and that's okay, and that we do have limitations. And so healthy shame brings us to the realization that we are limited and that we need help. Nietzsche talks about shame as the source of spirituality. And we also have toxic shame, which is where shame gets taken a little bit too far. And this is a deep-seated, pervasive feeling of being fundamentally flawed, unworthy, and unlovable as a person. And this is ultimately where the shame comes from, is this sense of self-hatred, the sense that we ourselves are not capable of being someone worth loving. The sense of shame is not just about feeling guilty for specific actions, but rather a core belief about one's inherent value and worthiness. And that comes from John Bradshaw. And then I want to bring in this quote from my dad over here too, which he told me when I asked him about shame. He said, shame is all about hiding. And I completely agree with that. Shame is an emotion of hiding, of trying to cover ourselves, of not allowing the world to see who we really are, because at one point it may have been so painful to do so. So common signs of shame. So these are some symptoms of shame, so you can self-diagnose yourself. The oscillation between grandiosity and worthlessness. That is a textbook example of shame. So grandiosity being this feeling that we are better than other people, and the worthlessness being we are worse than other people, and this constant oscillation between being better than others and worse than others, and this constant comparison of others in the external world. So that oscillation is a great sign of shame, of never actually just being equal with ourselves, as being and acknowledging our humanness, that we are human and that we are not better than or less than others. We are who we are. Addiction, another textbook example of shame. Like I mentioned, the comparison of others. Perfectionism, if you have an inner critic and you're afraid of making mistakes, you're afraid of feeling shame. And so that inner critic has developed as a defense mechanism inside of us so that we don't feel shame. Inability to ask others for help, inability to meet basic human needs, inability to pay rent or buy food or have new clothes when we need them. Negative self-talk, constantly berating ourselves, having low self-esteem. And with the self-talk and low self-esteem, it's like we're berating ourselves as an attempt so that nobody else can do it. It's we're going to shame ourselves first so that they don't even have the chance to do so. And basically what all of these messages are saying at the core is that I'm not enough as I am, that in some fundamental way I am flawed and incapable of being loved. So this comes from Alice Miller's book, The Drama of the Gifted Child. She says, we find a similar example in the behavior of addicts. People who as children successfully repress their intense feelings often try to regain, at least for a short time, their lost intensity of experience with the help of drugs or alcohol. And I'll add in addition, food, gambling, sex, money, work, you name it. That's all included in that as well. Where does shame come from? Well, I'm glad you asked. So shame comes from a couple of different dynamics. Ultimately, shame is very complex, and it can stem from intergenerational traumas that exist. And there's no ultimate one cause, but there can be causes of particular forms of shame inside of our bodies. So for instance, family dynamics. So Bradshaw talked about how certain attitudes or behaviors are influential in having a child's sense of self-worth or shame be developed. For instance, if a family believes that they are poor or less than other people, the child will most likely take on those same dynamics internally in those same belief systems. If a family believes that they are not as good as others, that can happen as well. The family dynamics of, the father coming home and shaming the children out of his own feelings of inadequacy. Those are family dynamics that could often develop shame within the children and the family system as well. Invalidating environments, school environments, churches, religious institutions, that people are often dismissed or punished for authentic expressions, and children's emotions and needs are not met in healthy ways. Traumatic experiences, this could be abuse, neglect, abandonment, enmeshment, critical incidents. So childhood trauma profoundly impacts self-esteem and contributes to the development of shame. It actually keeps us stunted at stages of growth. So if you imagine, we have a bunch of men who are actually still in the developmental stage of young boys because of their unresolved trauma and shame. And then we have our cultural and societal influence as well. This could stem from anything to sexuality, to race, to just what it means to be a man in today's society. And so these all can contribute to feelings of inadequacy. The constant, there's body shaming towards men as well. There is a constant bombardment of social media and expectations of how we're supposed to look or behave, or how many likes we're supposed to get, or all these different criteria that we believe may one day make us happy and fulfilled, but actually are a bottomless hole of, there's just nothing there. It's a ghost. It's a hungry ghost. It's a gaping hole of emptiness. And then we also have interpersonal relationships. So people in our lives who may reject us and then can reinforce an existing shame wound from our childhood, or even trigger new feelings of inadequacy as well. So I wanted to bring in this quotation as well from Iron John. So Robert Bly says Zeus energy, which encompasses intelligence, robust health, compassionate decisiveness, goodwill, generous leadership. Zeus energy is male authority accepted for the sake of the community. And so I want to acknowledge a couple things here, which is he's speaking about healthy masculinity here. Zeus energy is not the gung-ho, alpha male silverback gorilla sort of mentality that we've adopted as an American culture. It's actually the individual who takes on responsibility and authority for the sake of community with compassion, meaning to be with the pain of others. Compassion broken down is com, meaning with, and passion, being with the pain of other people, the emotions of other people. And this ability to be a leader, leadership in itself is not a toxic quality. Leadership for the sake of the individual can be extremely terrible. We can look at our former president in the United States, and who is an extreme example of toxic masculinity, who has accepted authority for the sake of himself and nobody else. And we have Zeus energy, which is for the sake of the community, the fact that we can acknowledge that we are here for others, and not to be disconnected from that. So how do we heal from shame? Well, healing from shame is fairly simple, actually. So John Bradshaw says, as a child, I was terrified of adults, and I did not want to express my anger around them. I have that now. So acknowledging that we, as adults today, do not have to live as our little children lived. I think there's a great example of this, of a story of a little elephant who was captured and brought to a circus. And at the circus, they tied him to a metal stake when he was a little elephant. And that stake was stuck in the ground. And so that little elephant tugged, and it tugged, and it tugged, and it could not break free until eventually it just gave up. 20 years later, the elephant is now 20,000 pounds heavier and is not only capable of ripping the stake out of the ground and running away, but the elephant could completely break out of the circus tent and go break away into freedom, and hurt its captors on the way as well. However, that elephant does not rip away the stake because it learned as a child that it could not do so. And that's a great metaphor for our internal belief systems. And what happened to us as children is that at some point we had a metal stake stuck in the ground, and we learned that we couldn't pass that stake as children, which was true in that moment, just like the baby elephant physically could not break free. However, as adults, we can now rip those stakes out of the ground, but we have to learn how to do so. And so how do we rip those stakes out of the ground? 1, becoming safe enough to feel the feelings inside of our body. 2, expressing creativity, whether through music or dance or writing or painting or games or sports, somehow learning and reconnecting to play as a form of healing and connecting to authenticity in those moments. And then being seen in safe spaces with trauma-informed professionals or community. Alice Miller writes in her book, as long as the old feelings were blocked, the most brilliant intellect cannot break this block down. So it has nothing to do with our intelligence or our rationality. It has everything to do with getting back into our bodies, where our source of joy and creativity lives. And in order to do that, we have to feel our feelings. So a couple tips for this. First and foremost, number 1, tell the truth. Learning to tell the truth is extremely imperative, because a lot of individuals, including myself, have learned to lie out of shame of who we are. I remember as a kid telling lies all the time about whether or not I watched certain movies just so that I could get friends to like me, that my need for connection was greater than my need for authenticity in those moments. So learning to tell the truth and not beating ourselves up when we don't tell the truth. Being vulnerable in safe spaces, underlining safe spaces here. You don't need to be vulnerable in every single situation, only in places that allow for you to express who you are without re-perpetuating trauma or shame. Taking care of our basic needs. For instance, making sure that we're drinking enough water, eating enough food, eating the right kinds of food, finding love in certain ways, whether through romantic and or friendships, exercise, sleep, drinking, once I already mentioned that, but drinking water. I'll say it again because it's really important. And then sexual needs, etc. practice setting boundaries. So many individuals who have trauma and shame from their past have a difficult time setting healthy boundaries because their boundaries were crossed as children, just like the little baby elephant, unable to break free from that. So learning to set healthy boundaries is a great way to do that. And we may experience guilt or shame when we set boundaries because it was not safe to do so in our childhood, but that is a practice that we can now take into our adulthood. Practicing self-compassion, affirmation, self-care, acceptance. I will literally stroke myself and tell myself I'm doing okay. I'm safe. I'm okay. I'm doing a good job. I'm practicing teaching myself that I'm worthy of touch. I know my physical body loves touch, and that's a way that I can give love to myself. I can give love to myself by exercising, by purchasing something that, you know, my inner child might like to really play with, like a Game Boy or a soccer ball or something that my little kid inside of me might really want, and then practicing authenticity. Learning when to say no is a huge practice of authenticity, of when you're invited to a social event that you really don't want to go to and just saying no, and being okay with that and not needing to explain yourself, but really just practicing who you are. Authenticity could also mean practicing your creativity. Authenticity could mean just expressing who you are in the moment, and acknowledging what emotions are there when we do express authenticity, whether it's shame, fear, hatred, anger, sadness, etc. So practical steps. Number 1, identifying shame triggers. Start becoming mindful and aware. You know, maybe develop a meditation practice or something to start identifying these shame triggers inside of us. 2, finding the beliefs that are attached to these and starting to challenge them. The words that we say to ourselves and we say out loud are very powerful, and they create our reality. So it's important that we start talking in ways that actually promotes growth inside of ourselves and isn't the perpetual shaming. Number 3, feeling our feelings. Some great practices are breath work, remembering that we heal in community, so not always trying to do this alone. And number 4 is practice self-compassion and vulnerability, learning how to tap into love for ourselves and making that a daily practice. I have a daily practice of connecting to love each morning and loving on myself, even if it's just for a couple of minutes, just so I can practice what it feels like to be safe in my body and to be giving myself the love that I need, because I do have a need for that, and I'm who I've been searching for my whole life. Ask for help. Get a therapist. Join a 12-step group, which is completely free to join. ACA, I highly recommend if you're looking to get into some family of origin work. You can do some incredible work there, completely free to go to. They are all over the world, so definitely check that out, and then begin working towards sobriety of some kind. So we all use certain coping mechanisms in order to hide or to not experience certain emotions. So start working towards sobriety in whatever form that means for you, and start to allow yourself to clear the tampering with our nervous system so that we can acknowledge and be present with the emotions that are here for us. So I'm going to leave us off with this little quotation here. So giving and receiving unconditional love is the most effective and powerful way to personal wholeness and happiness. That comes from John Bradshaw's book, Healing the Shame Mind. With that, thank you so much for tuning in. If you would like, please like and subscribe. It would help to get this video into YouTube's channel. I'd really appreciate it. It's free to do. I spent a lot of time making these videos just for you. If you'd like to schedule a free call with me down below, we can start working on some of this stuff today. We can work on finding your authenticity and healing from trauma and shame. Other than that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. All right, take care.